I have had the opportunity to dive on some amazing wreck sites in Queensland. Many of them have been historic shipwrecks, and many of them all have had great historic significance, and many of them have also involved stories of tragedy, great loss of life, as well as survival, and been quite emotive places. None more so though really than the Centaur. I mean, it was a tragedy that occurred on the very doorstep of one of Australia's most populous cities. It's been dogged by rumour and innuendo and mystery surrounding its loss since it was sunk in 1943. In 1974, a guy by the name of Mike Hatcher actually made headlines around Australia, and it was front page news on Sydney papers as well. Centaur hospital ship found. He claimed to have found the wreck about 10 nautical miles off Point Lookout in Stradbroke Island. His story is that he was warned off the site by the government, and then subsequently there were naval vessels sighted in the area, supposedly to destroy all evidence of Centaur. These headlines that you see here are from 1995. It's another time the Centaur was found, supposedly. This time it was by a man named Don Dennis. He claimed to have found the Centaur 10 nautical miles off Cape Morton, on Morton Island this time. In this instance, the Navy actually went to the site and verified it, and it was proclaimed as an historic shipwreck. In 2002, a couple of divers decided to check out the site. It was 184 metres deep, mind you, and this at the time was the world record dive to the bottom. They said that it's way too small to be the Centaur. The site that these two divers had actually dived on was a wreck called the Caulking, which had actually been sunk by the Commonwealth, who subsequently proclaimed it as a Centaur. And they sunk it in 1951 as target practice for the ROV, and subsequently forgot about it. Just quickly to have a look at some of the rumours that did surround this the Centaur, that it was carrying munitions and that there were commandos on board. Most of the crew were merchant marine or nurses and doctors, part of the medical corps. But the second 12 ambulance were actually allowed to carry their own personal weapons. The other situation was that there was a tremendous secondary explosion reported by the survivors, and this also sort of instigated rumours. But this can be, explained by the fact that the torpedo actually hit the fuel oil bunkers and triggered this explosion. No Japanese was ever brought to trial in the war crimes for this seemingly blatant breach and of the convention, so that's why it kind of persisted as well. Centaur was built in Scotland, and it was launched in 1924 and was built for the Western Australian run actually, from Perth or Freo to Singapore with cargo and passengers and livestock. It was quite a small vessel, it was about 3,000 tonne or just over that, and it had a very shallow draft. It had a pretty mundane life on the WA run. I think there was an incident actually worth noting in 1938 where it came to the rescue of a Japanese whaler which was on its way to the Antarctic. And this is an ironic incident really for two reasons. One, that it was a Japanese vessel that ultimately sunk Centaur, of course, but also that I think today, if it was today, I don't think there would be that many Australian ships willing to hitch a line to a Japanese whaler. They'd probably let it go. In 1941, it was involved in another incident. It actually came to the rescue of the crew of some Dutch sailors from a Dutch freighter, apparently. They'd claimed that they were sunk by a German naval vessel. The Centaur captain actually thought, there's something suspicious about this, and decided not to let them on board and kept them in the Centaur boats, as you can see here, and towed them back into Carnarvon. He was ultimately proved right, as the sailors in question were responsible for the sinking of the HMAS Sydney II. By late 1942, Australia had 3 hospital ships, and these were all large ships. They were ex-passenger vessels, and they were largely used for the Middle Eastern forum of the war. In late 1942, the Army requested another vessel, and it needed a smaller vessel, and they needed a vessel that had a shallow draft to navigate the reefs of the Barrier Reef and New Guinea, in the harbours in New Guinea. And they didn't need it to be that fast because it had been planned to just go to PNG and then just back to Townsville and back and forth as necessary. It was requisitioned by the Army, the Centaur, and was fitted out as a hospital ship. And here we see the Australian hospital ship Centaur, clearly marked, a big green band along both sides of the hulls, and there was 3 red crosses. These were lit by floodlights, and there was a red cross at the stern, and there was a red cross at the front of the bridge, which you can't see. There was an insignia number 47, it was the 47th hospital ship, it was given that number, and then there were 2 internally lit red crosses on each side of the funnel, and the whole vessel was painted white. It had actually done one voyage to New Guinea, and it returned and it went back to Sydney, and then it was loaded for its second voyage to New Guinea. It left Sydney on the 12th of May, was travelling up the east coast early in the morning on the 14th. It was off Brisbane, the night was clear and calm. Then at 4:10 there was just, out of nowhere, there was a tremendous explosion, a blinding blue flash, and Centaur had been struck by a torpedo on just forward of midships on its port side. Carnage ensued. The torpedo did hit the fuel bunkers, so the whole ship was in a blaze of fire. Seawater rushed in. Everyone was asleep except for the watch and the navigator. People were covered with oil, horribly burnt. No one even was able to launch any lifeboats successfully. No signals were made, and within 3 minutes Centaur was completely gone. The survivors drifted for 36 hours. Within this time, on the second night, actually, they heard a motor, and they thought at one stage they were going to be rescued, but within 100 metres from them they saw a black shape of a submarine rise, and naturally they thought this was the submarine that had sunk them and they were going to be machine gunned. They remained silent, and within half an hour that submarine actually dived again. So they ended up being rescued by the USS Mugford, a US destroyer, and an aircraft, which they spotted them simultaneously. With the crew of 332 on board, there were only 64 picked up. This is the sister ship, actually. This is a sister ship of the submarine that all the evidence pointed towards that sunk the Centaur. The captain denied the sinking, and he wasn't tried ever for that incident. So this, again, added to speculation. At this stage, we knew that the wreck, well, according to Gordon Rippon, was in very deep water. So not a lot of people held out a lot of hope that it could be found. Until in 2008, Sydney was found. Sydney was in deeper water off WA. And once this was found, it gave a lot of people hope. And a few months later, really, toward the end of 2008, there was a joint announcement by Prime Minister Rudd and the Queensland Premier Bligh that they would jointly fund a search for the Centaur. David Mearns, who actually had found the Sydney, was chosen to lead the project. So a search box of about 1,300 square metres was decided upon. The 2 main issues really for the search were the currents and also the seabed topography. This is the bathymetry of the search box. Probably approximately a third of the search box was very, very challenging terrain. The vessel that was selected was called the Seahorse Spirit. It was 2 phases. One was the search with the side scan sonars, and the second phase was filming with video and remote operated vehicle. These are the side scan sonars sitting on the deck of the Seahorse Spirit. You can see how David Mearns has created the track lines for the sonar search on his search box. Each one of these lines was 39 kilometres, and you had to be going at a 2.5 knot rate. And so it would take you about 6 to 8 hours to do one line. We had about 6 targets. These were eliminated, and we came down to 1 target that was a good chance. We did 4 runs in the high-res sonar over this target, and the 4th run was this image. For the sonar analysts on board, this was like a eureka moment. They said, this is a shipwreck. The dimensions of the Centaur correlated, and you can see potential superstructure. So David Mearns got on the phone and called the Premier and said, we've found the Centaur. We got home for Christmas, and then the second phase started in early January. This involved the ROV, which is the Remora 3. This actual ROV has been to the Titanic, I believe, about 6 times, and it's good for about 7,000 metres. The ROV was deployed at about 2:30 in the morning. It took about 4 hours to hit the bottom, and it crept along the seabed. This was the first image of the Centaur, and we hit right upon the port side where the torpedo had struck. As you can see, it's just a twisted tangle of metal. The hull was just sort of buckled and lifted and tangled. And we just followed it along, and after about 5 metres we came across some clean hull, and the first thing we saw was the Red Cross. And this was it. This was positive identification that we'd found Centaur, obviously. This is a part of the hull, and you can see here that there's a crater around the whole wreck site. You can see the preservation of the railings here, and you can even see the timber railing. Here we have the bathroom for the captain, and the porcelain is there. This is the steam header tank tap, so when they, to get hot water. This was looking into the cabin of Gordon Rippon. As it was a hospital ship, it had lots of hospital beds on board. This is the portside anchor, which has been dislodged from the impact. One of the identification things that we were looking for was the blue funnel star that is on the bows. So this was a great thing to see, and it was another nail in the coffin in terms of the identification. And here you can see the other anchor in position and the angle of the bow. Another identifying feature was the Paravane arm, which were fitted on ships during the World War II era for cutting moored mines. Here is some of the incredible preservation, and this is timber decking that you can see the grain of the timber and the caulking and everything, and it was just quite incredible. I mean, the conditions were fairly anaerobic. Here is some of the deck rails with the rail lights. These were spotlights that we used to illuminate the red crosses. And now this shot is from the bow, so you're looking from the bow of the vessel, looking at the foredeck. And this was a companionway, which you couldn't really see in that image, but it was just under where the bell is. This is the windlass that you saw in that historical shot. And this is the awning crutch without the bell. And so at this stage we thought, oh well, the bell's obviously been broken off and during the sinking or the explosion. We did have a quick look, and lo and behold, so it had just broken off probably after the wrecking and just dropped down and amazingly just wedged itself between these ventilators and pipes. This is the starboard side, so the force of the explosion and all the impact, the rivets had popped and the hull plates just buckled, opened up. This is the foremast, which you saw in that earlier historic shot, and here we have it again. Same mast. But this one obviously just snapped off by the force of the sinking or the explosion, and it's intact. I mean, it's snapped, but it's intact. It's not imploded. This is the underside. This is the underbelly of the starboard side. You can see the rusticles just littered on the ground. This is the Plimsoll line or waterline, which is used for the legal load limits and to see how much weight is in the vessel. That level of detail was still visible on this site. It's on a red cross. Just an example of some of the amazing sort of features that you could see on this site. This is just the engine skylights open. Now this is at the stern of the wreck site. You can see the preservation levels are quite incredible, like the rails, and really shows the angle of the site. Again, the draft marks, but this time at the stern, and the rudder, counter stern going up, quite clear. You can see the crater in this site. This is obviously the rudder, and you can see the crater around the wreck. In case they lost steerage in the bridge, they had an emergency steering wheel at the stern, and this is it in situ. Timber structure, which was the support for the Red Cross on the stern. No Red Crosses on the stern or bridge or funnels were observed. The funnel was gone. Obviously, it had broken off during the explosion. Lifeboat cradle. No lifeboats were successfully launched, and no lifeboats were visible or there's no evidence of lifeboats. So they would have broken off during the sinking. On the request of the Centaur Association, we actually laid a plaque on the wreck site. This contains the names of all those crew that were on board Centaur when she was torpedoed. A short service was held on top of the site after the laying of the plaque. The discovery of the Centaur hopefully will provide some closure to those people that had relatives on the ship and had a connection to the ship in some way, and also to the community as a whole on this terrible chapter that occurred just off Brisbane in 1943. It's now protected under the Historic Shipwreck Act, the actual location, so that's another level of protection for it. Thank you very much for listening.